Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Rock Experience with Mike Brunn. On this episode, I am really excited to have with me the director of the new KISS documentary, DJ Viola. DJ shares with us the experience of putting together this documentary, working with Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons. He also shares with us what it was like getting some new footage that we're excited to see in this documentary, as well as sharing with us some thoughts and insights on the second part. I have to say, hearing some of those stories has me equally or maybe even more excited to see part 2 compared to part 1, which already sounded great to begin with. I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode, so let's jump in and let's get started. So KISS fans are very aware that there is a new 4-hour documentary that's titled Biography, KISStory, set to premiere on A&E June 27th and June 28th. I'm really excited to have with me today the director of that documentary, DJ Viola. Welcome, DJ.
Well, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited about the enthusiasm. I'm excited for everyone to see this movie finally.
Yeah, no, I could tell you as a KISS fan myself, there's a lot of KISS fans that are excited. Now, clearly, if you look at your resume, you've done a lot, producing, directing, you've got commercials for Intel, for Samsung, you've done Hallmark movies, Christmas movies, which are always very popular, right?
Oh, yeah.
Documentary on Eminem, right? So how'd you start getting working with KISS, and when did you start working with them?
Well, I've known Paul a little bit over the years prior to this. I've been on this project now for a little over a year. I had just wrapped up, I think, my third scripted feature for the EP, Leslie Greif, who also did Gene Simmons' Family Jewels.
Sure.
So he's been around KISS for a long time. And then, I've been, friends with Paul, but it was nothing more than like, we weren't really talking about the doc. And the doc had started without me. And it was kind of passed through a couple of different companies, and it wasn't really finding its footing. And so I came aboard to help sort of shape the thing when it was only a 90-minute movie. Oh, and as we started to dive in, we're like, this is an 8-hour movie. What do we do with this? Like, there's, close to 50 years, let alone like we even go to, the birth of these men. Like, it is a serious span of time. So ultimately we arrived at the 2-night special, which really helped sort of give this thing the time that it required. But even that was still just a hard culling, but it was a fun experience.
Now, that's one of the things I wondered is, KISS has a 50-year career, right? And there's lots of stuff already in the media. There's other documentaries that have been done on KISS. Mm-hmm. How do you keep this feeling fresh and keep it new for fans who've maybe seen some of the other stuff?
Sure. I mean, one of the things stepping into it, first, it's an honor to be at the helm of, such a, arguably one of the greatest stories in all of, rock and roll. But it's daunting also. It's daunting not only because of the span of time, but the knowledge base of the fans out there. And so for me, no matter how much I study, I will never be at the expert level that the lifers are, And so they're always going to still be mad at me about something. And so it's like, okay, what I want to do then is I want to approach this from a place that people haven't seen this band before. I want people to understand the why things happened. I want to know the personality of these people and what makes them tick and what made KISS happen. And that was a little bit of a journey because or learning curve for the guys, because they've been interviewed tens of thousands of times, right? Sure. And they have a script and they say it. And so I would sift through a lot of footage, and then I would sit and talk with them. And as soon as they would fall into that script again, I'd be like, stop. Now that is a little intimidating at first because Gene Simmons doesn't hear stop very
Right.
often. You know? Like, no, I'm a rock star and I'm talking, you know.
Right.
But then once they learned that, like I kept asking the same question, but why? But
Right.
why? You know, like how did you feel? And that's when I think this is also what's so particular about this timing. The end of the road tour, they're at a both retrospective but introspective time in their career.
Sure.
So they are comfortable. The more we push, the more they were comfortable going to that place of like, well, that came out of fear, you know, and you can either like, you know, hide in a corner or you can step up. And so a lot of that like self-empowerment that, you know, that Kiss portrays in their music really came through in this doc as we learned how they navigated these ups and downs throughout their story. So I think that's the difference maker. Paul called me on Saturday after the Tribeca premiere of night one and said, no one's ever seen my band like this before. And that was, I mean, that's about as big of a compliment as I can get, you know, so that was pretty exciting. I hope the fans feel the same.
You know, I know a number of people who were at the Tribeca event last Friday, and the overall consensus is that so far part one that was shown there was incredible. And of course, it's got people thinking, you know, what's going to be part two all about? But I have to ask you, were you a Kiss fan growing up? I know you said you weren't like some of the diehards, but were you a Kiss fan growing up?
Of course. I mean, it's you can't not be, right?
Right.
You know? I mean, the fun thing is to see people who don't think they're Kiss fans go, oh, I didn't realize that was a Kiss song. Oh, I didn't realize, you know, so it's funny that you're like, yeah, we're all Kiss fans, you know, and you couldn't help but be in awe of them. You know, I'm 48, so I think my mom had a little more protection over me than maybe people just a few years older. So I had less access at an early age, you know, because I wasn't quite old enough to glob on. But like everyone else, when you hit 15, they're undeniable, you know, like by then, that is when you're coming of age of like, I'm a person and I'm going to go out and live. And they're the greatest band for that. And that's how they continue to pack arenas with 15 to 65, 75-year-old people, you know, because they all found them at that same moment in time. So that's absolutely. That's so you can't not be, or you don't like music, you know?
Right. Now, one of the things that some of the fans I spoke to that were at the Tribeca event, they were so excited that the documentary had some, I'll say, new footage that Kiss fans had never seen before. Who was the driving force behind that? Was it you, somebody at A&E? Was it the band? Who was the driving force behind finding this new footage?
There are a couple of heroes in making this thing. Undoubtedly, my editors were so dedicated to. We all were, in that, you know, when the workday ended, we all sat there and watched more footage, and you'd watch the long takes, and you sifted through mountains and mountains of this stuff. There's a particular KISStorian, if I can call him that, named Kurt Gooch, who I'm sure is known well, and you know, in the circles, who really took some ownership to and represented the voice of the superfan throughout this process, where he kept saying they always wanted to know if this video existed, you know, like so he was a great sounding board. Now he can get mired in the minutia sometimes, as everybody should, but that's his power, right? And so it was great to have those conversations with him. So I thought he was truly a massive asset to this, but also it was the editors and our continuing journey to expose the diehard fans to the brand new fans to the insight of the band. And in that journey, then there's, even if it's footage you've seen before, maybe we kept it on longer, or maybe we gave it a different context. So a lot of stuff feels fresh, let alone every time we got some email, found footage, never seen, like we would all freak out, you know, like where does it fit in, you know, and you'd have it in these different sections, you know. Then at some point you have to move on through a time period too. Like the movie is very, I try to design it to feel like a Kiss show or feel like a Kiss album. And so, which are very punchy 4-minute segments, you know, it's a song, you know? And so rather than introducing a conflict and, you know, giving it resolution 60 minutes later, it's very chapter based that way. Conflict resolution. So the long tail of the story is the takeaway of the band and their journey. But each one of those little things feels, I think, like a Kiss made documentary. And that was important to me. This isn't a, you know, I like Laurel Canyon, I like Echoes in the Canyon, I like the Bee Gees doc. All those docs are particular to who those bands are. This had to feel like Kiss made this movie, and that was important in the style.
That's awesome. So now I would assume, as the director on this, like you said, there was hours and hours and hours of footage, interviews. Was there anything that was kind of left on the cutting room floor that you were like, oh, I wish I could have included that, but there's just not enough hours to do this?
All the time. And most of that stuff was like really, really fun tangential stories, like Gene and Ace in A Holiday Inn is like a brilliantly funny story, that every time he tells it is wonderful. And we build these packages of like cutting the B-roll and building it, like there's a lot of that kind of stuff, them held up at the Vagabond Inn, like a lot of the things that don't necessarily feed into the direct, KISStory, lineage, but where you just wanted to round out the story. And so I tried to save as many of those as you could. And at some point it is like, pulling your fist out of a bucket of water. Like once it's gone, you're okay, but there's so many of that like color and flavor that we kept trying to maintain throughout. Like you got to get to know these guys, and you can't do that without hearing about what it was like. So, they were heartbreaking. Brad Abramson was a brilliant storytelling executive at A&E. Had there's always a term in docs that you're trimming the fat, and you're trying to release the form from the stone. And at one point when we were trying to get this thing down to time, Brad's like, I get it, you're not cutting bone. And it was exactly right. These things hurt, and that's really when I had to lean on the committee too, like, where does everyone else think? Because I find it all precious,
Right.
So once we got down to it though, I think it's appropriately length, and I think there's plenty in there for everyone.
That's awesome. Now, do you know, and you might not notice, but do you think there's any plan to put it out like on a DVD or a Blu-ray with some bonus footage? Because I know there's people overseas that can't see it. Do you know if that's a
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard about some second window opportunities that A&E is exploring. I think as the movie started to take shape and their enthusiasm came in, and more people wanted their name on it, which is was a compliment, that it was like, okay, I've heard grumblings of where they might want to take this, but I think at this point right now, we're so hyper focused on 27, 28, of this month. Let's get this thing delivered. I mean, we're still polishing, so it's going to be right up to the last minute. Yeah,
incredible.
But then once this thing's out, I think hopefully there's some demand, and that drives more of a global output.
Yeah, I definitely think there will be. Now, you mentioned before Paul and Gene sitting with you guys going through an interview, and it sounds to me like while there might have been back and forth questions, there was a lot of like, stop, like you said, give me more detail on that. There's been a lot of stories about Ace and Peter being asked to join, and for various reasons, I've heard they weren't offered enough money. I've heard they left too much money on the table. I heard Ace wanted creative control. Do you have any insights as to why they decided not to participate in this?
I was a hair late to most of that conversation, maybe luckily. So kind of what you're saying are the same things I heard. When I came in just as hot and heavy as anyone else would. Like, we gotta have them. And everyone's like, that ship's kind of sailed. And so then I started to approach it from, what if we started to shape the movie and share it with them, and then see if I can get their involvement. And it was no longer as communicative as I was hoping to. So I'm not quite sure what I stepped into there. But what we did do, because of that constraint, was there was no way to tell this story without their point of view. So I went through myself and the editors, mountains of footage to get previous interviews with these guys. So let's say I did get Ace and Peter for this movie, and let's say I only got 2 hours with them, I've got hundreds of hours with them from the past. So let me go through that and get their side of the story. And this was actually a big mandate from Gene. One of the very first phone calls I had with him was Ace and Peter have to be well represented in this movie. They're the founding members. They're rock stars. Do not glaze over them. And so, because Paul and I had these ideas about, like, I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary Hitsville, which is Barry Gordy and Smokey Robinson. It's like a wonderful relationship, and a journey with these two together. You could almost do that with Paul and G. You could almost take them to a studio and watch them for an hour and a half, and it's wildly entertaining. That's why the couch stuff was wildly entertaining. Sure. But that's not the Kiss story. And so the Kiss story is so intertwined with those founding members that I tried the entire night one, those guys are still in the band. And then a huge portion, I would say 75% of the entire movie in totality has the 4 of those guys in it, because that's ultimately what people want to know, including when they weren't in the band, why they weren't in the band, and give their side of it. So it isn't always as balanced as just having them there and hitting them with the exact same question. But man, we tried as hard as we could that fans will at least walk away going, okay, I understand it.
That's awesome. Now, was there any time where like you found footage, let it be from Ace or Peter, where you said, I want to put this as a counterpoint to what Paul and Gene said? And did the band ever say, no, you can't? Or were they open to, it sounds like Gene wanted to make sure they were represented.
Not once, to their credit, did Gene and Paul ever make a mandate. It was warts and all, because they also, they wanted to make this, like, they wanted to tell this story and tell it authentically. And so, to their credit, there was nothing off limits. They,
Awesome.
like anyone, when you're interviewed for a long time, they would kind of hit me up the next day, like, "Hey, was that part okay?" It's great. So when you talk for a long time, you eventually, especially the way we were doing our interviews, which wasn't just what happened, but why. So as they're revealing, you of course retract back to normalcy afterwards, and you go, "Oh, what was that?" But there was never a note on story. They were always like, "That is, go for it." I mean, the Ace and Peter stuff is so sensitive. The Eric Carr stuff so sensitive, and it was like, this is the journey, man. Like, tell it. And so, to that degree, I would delve into it. The at some point, Gene also says, "You're tired of hearing your mom say Dad's a drunk," and so he's like, "I'm trying to tell you what happened without the fans being like, all right, already, we love these guys." He's like, "I love these guys. I just like the one version of the guys, not the other." And so he was trying to be like, "I get it. We're all tired of hearing that." And so there's some points too where it's like, I'm done harping on how this thing fell apart. I'd rather celebrate the next step. So to some degree, I would go as deep as I thought it felt right. And then it was like, okay, let's get to where they come back again and we celebrate the reunion and all that kind of stuff. So
right. Yeah, one of the things that I heard from people who saw part one, and a lot of KISS fans say this, Paul Stanley is usually very guarded, and he seemed to have let his guard down a bit during this, especially in part one, where people saw it and they're like, we've never heard him talk about that before. So that, I assume that was a little bit of a challenge for you during that process.
It was, especially like, I mean, I told you I've known Paul for years. And so it was very like, I had to keep relying on him as a friend. Like, Gene's a little more, I mean, Family Jewels trained him, right? Like, personal, here we are, Paul is by design, Paul exists and he has control over that. And so it was actually a really, I think, illuminating journey for him to try to be open in that way. And he's got a real story to tell. I mean, his book shaped a lot of how I approached him, his first book. I mean, it is not a rock and roll book. It is a self-empowerment against adversity book. I mean, the first chapter, I was like, what is this? It's a crazy book. And so that's the story that, like, we had to be careful not to be woe is me with my ear. Oh, here's Paul again with his ear. Like, that's not what it is. But Paul Stanley is one of the greatest rock and roll frontmen of all time.
Agreed.
Because he was born that way. His drive comes from this, you will not tell me I can't.
Right.
And I think that is why he's never slowed down, why he continues to push, and what makes him special. So we kind of wanted to celebrate his overcoming rather than just be like, oh, woe is me, and that was the dance there. But once he got comfortable with it, he went for it. And that's scary, for these guys, and they did it.
Absolutely. No, and that's really well said about him as a front man. Now, you mentioned before Eric Carr, right? Nobody has seen the previews yet for part two. Can you give us a little bit of insight what part two covers? Obviously, it's from 1980 and beyond, but can you give us a little bit more insight about part two?
Part two, a lot of people, in our inner circle, almost like part two better because it's less talked about. A lot of the topics we delve into has been less explored. So the movie, especially through the non-makeup years, and understanding how it took Paul getting his ear fixed to now being comfortable to come front facing, but how Gene is two dynamically different people. He's the demon and he's Gene. Paul's a little more intertwined, and so how that allowed Paul to come out, and be like, "This is me, world," and Gene go, "I don't know what this is," and so that divisiveness was interesting. I think we do a wonderful job of talking about just Eric Carr's talent, Eric Carr's heart, and I don't mean the tumor. Like, what a beautiful individual this guy was. But how the fans were confused by it, and they had no problem. Paul and Gene are very front-facing about kind of the betrayal the fans felt, and that cut them. They care about them. They are a fans band, man. That is how they continue to remain on fire. So we get into that. You know, the Eric, him getting sick is a touchy one that's been covered a lot, that I navigated, I thought, as appropriately as I could, to say, let's celebrate Eric. And there's worlds in which you can always, in hindsight, second guess people's actions. And I dug pretty deep on a lot of the interviews and found some beauty in these guys talking about how they just hadn't ever dealt with anyone being lethally sick. You know, they just had never, and to some degree, it just, they thought he was going to get better and come back. They just truly did. You know, now in hindsight, they can second guess how they reacted to something, but as we delved into it, we were really we were making a whole meal out of that, like regret rather than the celebration of Eric. And so that's one of those where I made a conscious decision to be like, I think what's interesting here is Eric's story, not Gene and Paul's, you know? So, but that being said, it was tell it however you want. And I think we helped elevate everyone there. You know, and then we get into, of course, I think we really spent a lot of time trying to handle Tommy's trajectory. You know, Tommy climbed the ranks of that band.
Absolutely.
And it's fascinating to see, you know, and how do you start to introduce Tommy? And I think we found a really slick device on how we get him in there, and how by the time he reaches that, you know, the spaceman, you're rooting for him. I think every character, if I can call them that, sort of has their journey, you know, from beginning to end in this thing. And I think that in and of itself, as you walk away, you have a good understanding of all the individuals that make up this band.
Absolutely. No, that sounds very exciting to me as a lifelong fan of the band and appreciating all the eras. Now, was Bruce Kulick involved at all in any of interviews or anything?
Yeah. Bruce is interviewed, and I mean, Bruce was 10 years, you know?
Absolutely.
And so, I mean, you can tell me it's probably to the months that everyone else knows, but you know, Bruce put in his time. Awesome. Bruce put in his time, and I mean, what a you know, beautiful and genuine individual he is. And so he is just so, you know, soft-spoken and sweet. And he talks about the first time he ever auditioned for them, which is really fun, and didn't get the job, which is pretty cool, you know? So it's again, it's words and all, but I think with a fun tone to it that just gives you personality throughout. So yeah, Bruce is well represented, and I'm glad he's a part of it. And I'm glad, I mean, we cover, you know, Mark St. John, we buzzed through pretty quick. But you know, we tell the Vinny story too. You know, I mean, these are all chapters that these guys went through, and it's important to the story.
Yeah, I know. I noticed that on one of the trailers, there was a Creatures clip with an interview, it looked like, and Vinny's there in makeup. And I'm like, as a diehard fan, I've never seen that before. That's cool. And then I was like, oh, so that's cool. Vinny's going to be represented. Did anybody ever consider reaching out to him? I know there's tension between the band and him, but did anybody ever reach out to him?
I don't have a sense of that one. Right. You know, I was so hyper focused on sort of the Ace and Peter. I know that there is a history of some, I don't know, I'd rather stay out of it.
Fair enough.
I think lawyers get involved, and therefore I don't want to speak on it, you know? So, you know, but with all of them, I mean, to me, I hope it all works out. I hope everyone watches this thing and likes the way they represent it. I truly do. I can't imagine watching a documentary on myself. So I'm sure if someone said one bad thing, it's the only thing I'd focus on, you know?
Of course, right.
But I mean, I think there's a world in which, like, I think you get a great understanding of who Ace is through this whole thing. You know, I really think you get a sense of sort of the wonderful, like, just the beauty of who he is, you know, and sort of the tragic story of not being able to maybe hold on. But it's also hard to hold on when you're dealing with, like, the rock and roll versions of BB King. Like, these guys are 200 shows a year. Like, you know, and even when we interviewed Grohl, and he's like, yeah, you go out on tour and you come home for 3 months and you'll never do it again until you kind of get those grumblings. These guys don't, you know? Right. And so if you've got some rock and roll tendencies in your off time, that's a hard schedule to keep up, you know?
It is. Now, for you, what was the difference between doing like a Kiss documentary compared to the Eminem documentary that you worked on?
Yeah, I think Eminem actually trained me to make sure that I first understood what Kiss means to the fans. I know what they mean to me, But with Eminem, I spent a lot of time in the crowd trying to figure out that he was speaking for people who necessarily were feeling that but couldn't put it to words. And so at Kiss shows, I spent a lot of time out in the audience. I've even been on the Kiss cruise. You know, I used to just walk that thing, you know, bow to stern, meeting all the fans, because I'm just so, especially with Kiss, it's just so fun, you know, like everyone identifies with how they feel when they're at a Kiss show or how they feel when they listen to Kiss music. It's about self-empowerment. It's about pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Do not be a victim and celebrate life right now. Absolutely. Don't wait, you know? And so to that degree, it was similar in that I wanted the fans to have the same feeling while watching this as anything that I ever did in that hip hop world, you know? Sure. It's that I want you to feel like Eminem made that movie. I want you to feel like Kiss made this movie. It feels like a Kiss show. It feels like a Kiss album. And that was important.
It sounds awesome to me. You know, one or two more questions. I believe you were in Dubai with the band for New Year's Eve, right? Because I remember seeing pictures. I looked through the credits on that DVD, the broadcast that was on. I didn't see your name on it. Were you there for part of this documentary?
Yeah, I went. Again, these guys weren't on tour. So making this film was awful, you know, like, of 48 years, this is the first year they got on tour and you want me to make a movie about them, you know? So like, there was such little access, you know, everyone's scattered, you know, like they don't live in like the rest of us during COVID, you know, they can bubble themselves. And everyone had different protocols, you know. Tom Morello had 2 grandmas living in his house and we had to ship gear to his house and have the tech set it up via Zoom. And like, it was crazy. Dave's like, you know, swing by the studio on Wednesday. So it was trying to find everyone's comfort level. But I never had these guys together very often. So when we did, we milked it for everything we could. So when I found out they were doing Dubai, which was very last minute for such a major, major production, I jumped on a plane and got out there because I needed any kind of rehearsal behind the scenes, any verite I could get. And thanks to, you know, to Dan, the director of that project, he allowed me to sort of grab some crew there and go get some really insightful stuff for those guys. So that helped immensely. And then it was also just fun to see like the comparison of like that epic show and then see them play at Tribeca the other night. And just to see how these guys, it doesn't matter the venue, they are as big as possible, you know? It was also pretty exciting Friday night to see them with a crowd again, you know, like that felt like Kiss, you know, it's not, they feed off the energy of that crowd so much. It was just, it's exciting to think that they're back, you know?
And I would think for you as a director, it was exciting to have people seeing the documentary for the first time, even if it was only a few hundred people, and hearing some of the reactions and probably seeing some of the face reactions as well.
It's amazing, you know. I mean, it's scary, it's terrifying, you know. So first you sit there on a tech level, like, okay, how's the mix here, and you know, in an outdoor, you know, park. But it was the fans that came up, or especially the diehard fans that know their stuff, that talked about their level of excitement on what they hadn't seen before, what they didn't know before, what they hadn't heard before. That to me was an incredible compliment. Everyone who said it was you know, at the after party said it was a great movie. I love that. I also think it really helps when Kiss plays afterwards because you're all jacked up, you know. But truthfully, I mean, it was nothing but a love fest that night. And that's pretty exciting, especially when it's been us in in our own dark rooms for the last year plus making this thing, to actually get it out there. And the stuff that we're still just like, I'm still fine tuning right now. Like we're going to be delivering, you know, practically day of, and A&E's going to be mad at us, but we're doing everything we can to get this stuff right there, and to see people, you know, start to experience it and enjoy it, that this thing may have legs, is really invigorating again.
That's incredible. You know, talking about fine tuning, some of the guys that I know that saw it, they're like, even the footage that they've seen before has never seen cleaner, clearer. They're like, somebody went through and really massaged or found new sources of this stuff, because they're like, this is a 2-story screen and it looked crystal clear.
It did. That LED screen was amazing. It wasn't a projector, and so it just looked gorgeous. And I mean, I'm literally texting color notes to my colorist. Well, it was that good, you know. Wow. Talking about saturation levels and whatnot, but yeah, it was the access to the footage. It was the Herculean lift of our assistant editors having to try to get that stuff into. There's 2,500 clips in the first night. That's
Wow.
an incredible amount of licensing and
Yes.
footage to replace, right? And then when we did, my long-term colorist and finishing editor, Mark Bach, just combed through. If there was a still he didn't like, he would clean it up. If there was footage, he could up-res and recolor and set that black point and shape. Like he didn't just set something. He literally graded the movie. It's not just color, it's grading. And that, I think, helps bring this thing to life. You feel like you're in there.
Well, the fans noticed it. The fans noticed
There's
it.
also an auditory element to this. Like Doug Bossy, who did our score, when he's recording, either play, anytime he'd play over someone to amplify, maybe if we're talking about Ace, want to hear Ace a little louder, but that, mix doesn't allow it, or he would do sound alikes for some of the filler of the movie. Like for the 70s recording, he put deep shag carpet on the ground so the sound would sync.
Wow.
People really owned their role in this movie to help elevate this thing as a visually and sonic representation of Kiss. And to that degree, again, that's why it's such an honor, is that everyone working on it felt like it was an honor, so that's pretty fun.
Well, it showed, and I'll thank you for that. My last question for you. So what's next on the horizon for you, right? So we've spoke about you doing Hallmark movies, commercials, documentaries. What's next for you?
I don't know. I mean, you do Kiss, and you start looking at like what other bands, there's plenty out there, but
Sure.
Holy crap, I just did 50 years of history. Like there's kind of not too many parallels there. I don't know. Honestly, I've been so buried in this thing right up until, last night we were still, mixing this thing. I'll be mixing this thing again on Monday. So I haven't picked my head up. I think I'm going to reintroduce myself to my children and see how much they've grown, and then figure out what comes after that.
Well, that sounds great. DJ, I want to just say thank you. From everything I've seen and heard so far, this seems like a Kiss dream come true. It seems like a great job was done. Thank you for what you've done for this.
Absolutely. I truly hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to hearing from you. Please let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear it. And thanks for your time today. Thanks for helping to get the word out there.
Absolutely. Thank you, and be well. Be safe.
All right. Take care.
All right, take it easy. Bye-bye. All righty. There you have it. I'd like to thank DJ for spending some time with me and shedding some more insights to the upcoming Kiss documentary biography, KISStory. Thanks a lot, DJ. I really enjoyed our chat. I'd also like to extend a thank you to both Tribeca as well as A&E for helping coordinate this interview. Thanks to both of you. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. If you're listening to one of my podcasts, subscribe over there as well. Also, head on over to Facebook and follow my page, The Rock Experience with Mike Brunn, where each and every day we talk about all the rock and roll music that you love. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter as well. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you all next time.